Alan, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Conversation Design podcast.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's good to be here.
So since our life turned out to be more cyberpunk than what we were expecting, I think we met I'm Italian, you're German. I think we met in Tel Aviv in 2016.
I'm not German, but we did meet in Tel Aviv the first time.
You're not German, so that's the first mistake I did. So please introduce yourself so I stop making mistakes.
No problem at all. So my name is Alan, Alan Nichol, and I grew up in the Netherlands, and I'm half Dutch. My father's from Scotland, and I lived in Edinburgh on and off for about 10 years before moving to Berlin. So I live in Berlin and have done for a few years. So that's probably where you get it from, that I'm German. But my co-founder, Alex, is German. And so we met in 2013 in the UK, actually. So Alex was studying in London. That's how we met. And then we moved to Berlin for our first startup, which didn't work out and we shut it down. But that was how we ended up here in the first place.
That's amazing. And then you started Rasa. And I remember when Rasa first came out, it was really different than everything else that was going on back then on bots, which was a lot of things. But I'm eager to learn from you, like, why did you start it? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we were interested in the space. I mean, even when we were kind of in the dying days of our first startup, we started building some bots initially on Slack, because that was the platform that was open at the time. I just had a bit of fun, like, experimenting with ideas. And then we had a couple of projects, in the interim time that kind of took off to a very minor extent. We had, a couple of paying customers for a few bots that we built on Slack and on Facebook Messenger. And one was one we called DataBot. And the idea was that you could interact with your marketing data warehouse in natural language. So you could ask questions like, how much did I spend on Facebook campaigns in the last 2 weeks, or something like that, right? And of course, the very first thing you realize when you give something like that to people is they don't ask such good questions, right? If people formulated such good questions, they would just write SQL. And so they would ask questions like, how's Facebook? And then you realize, well, you've got to have some back and forth and figure out what these people are talking about. And so we, very quickly realized that conversational AI is very hard. It's very, very hard. And we saw this kind of brewing hype, leading up to the Facebook Messenger platform opening up, of everybody saying, chatbots are going to be the next big thing and they're going to be great. And we kind of said, hold on a second, nobody knows how to build these things. And we know because we've tried and we've used all the tools that are out there, and there's not much you can do. So we kind of, came out and took the opposite view, which is conversational AI is very hard and there's lots of work to be done before it's going to be any good, rather than like, this is the next big platform right now, right? And so we started from that kind of perspective. And and then the first product that we released wasn't the first one we started building, but it was the first one we released was Rasa NLU. And that was, that came out of the fact that we started a meetup in Berlin, Bots Berlin. And obviously it was well attended because this was like a hypey topic at the time and everyone was there. And what we kept hearing from people was, oh, we're going to roll out our own NLP, next month. We don't have time right now, but we're totally going to get to it, next month or the month after or something like that.
Right. A classic.
Classic, exactly, right. And I mean, the reason why was pretty obvious, right? Everyone was using these third-party APIs, right? And it's kind of a precarious situation to be in, right? Because you're developing an application and, imagine if you're building a mobile app and like every button click has to go through a third party before you understand what it means, what button they clicked or what they did, right? I mean, you don't know if they're going to start charging you money or what's going to go on there, if they're just going to shut it down. I mean, Facebook had shut down Parse, a year before, so they had very little trust. And Wit.ai was one of the major players at the time. And so I wrote this blog post called Do It Yourself NLP for Developers. or for bot developers or something like that. And to date, it is by an order of magnitude, my most read blog post, right? But everyone was reading it, everyone was sharing it. Nobody did it. Absolutely nobody went and built their own NLP still, even though we kind of had a tutorial on how. So then we said, okay, let's take it a step further and let's just open source the thing that we built, and then everyone can collaborate on the same code base rather than reinventing the same thing, which they don't have time to do. I mean, very innocent observation, but that was it. And then we pitched it as, here's an open source drop-in replacement for Wit.ai or Lewis or API.ai, which is now Dialogflow since the Google acquisition. And I mean, that was just the right product at the right time, right? Everyone who had been pushing their own NLP off for a few months was like, oh, great, excellent. So then, from that came the initial kind of awareness of Rasa as a brand and as a company and as a project, and everything else built up from there.
Right. So basically, to like bring it to a little bit less technical level for our more design oriented audience. So basically, what you're telling me is like, look, Rasa is replacing the cloud natural language processing things that, say, Google and Microsoft are offering, and you can do that in-house.
You can do that in-house, and you can tweak it to get better performance out, because you can customize all of the pieces. You're not beholden to one of these APIs staying affordable and up all of the time, right? You kind of bring it in-house. And for a lot of teams, right, that training data that you're collecting is IP, and it's important, and it's maybe part of your defensibility as a company, right? And so you probably want to keep that to yourself. And with Rasa, you can, because it's open source.
Right. And now you're being very humble, but from this beginning, like, you grew like crazy, you raised a lot of money, you have a lot of folks in your team. You want to be a little bit less humble now that you're on a project. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, so we decided that we wanted to build an open source company. And so when we thought about it, we said, actually, what we really want to do is we want to build the standard infrastructure for conversational AI, right? We want to be the definitive tool, the definitive framework that people use that powers all of these conversations, whether they're voice or text or wherever they happen. And so we reached out to a bunch of open source founders to learn about how that works. And we talked to everybody, like all the big open source companies you can think of. We just cold emailed all of them, got talking to all of them. It was fantastic. Learned a lot, learned how hard it is to build an open source company. But realized that was really exactly the thing we wanted to do, was build kind of the definitive solution in this space. And we're on our way. Obviously, we have some way to go. But yeah, I mean, the reception is just incredible, right? And I think nobody knew in 2016 when we started that there would be one horizontal platform that would power, the conversational AI of all the big companies in all the different spaces and verticals, right? There was this assumption that, vertical AI is going to win. Everything that's horizontal is just a commodity. You can't build anything there. And this was the VC thesis at that time around all AI projects. And we took the opposite view. We said, actually, no, that doesn't make sense. And so you have just, if you look on our website, a lot of huge companies using Rasa for all sorts of things, right? Customer-facing things, internal tools, IoT things, internal platforms, all sorts of stuff. And at this point, I think it's 5 of the top 10 banks in the world and 6 of the top 10 insurance companies and utilities. Each of those use Rasa already. So it's really pretty much every company where you look, there will be at least one project using Rasa. So
that's amazing.
Open source is a great distribution model.
That's
and I
great.
think we kind of hit a nerve with being frank with people and saying, look, this is hard. And you know what? All these other tools say, don't worry your head about machine learning, right? Don't worry about all of that. We'll take care of that for you. And we said, well, do worry about it. And here are some knobs you can turn, and here's how you can educate yourself on how to do more. And I think we built a very powerful developer movement around that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one other thing that kind of like we share about society, although from the design point of view, is this idea that the horizontal solution that works for any use case is the way to
Mm.
go, because this stuff is hard, so you cannot reinvent it for every use case. It doesn't really make sense. I think that's something that we share. And probably the other thing is you cannot really build a great bot in 5 minutes. Like that's not
Yeah.
really. It
Exactly. It is
requires a lot of
craft,
work.
and it takes a team, and it takes tools like Botsociety, as well as, you know, the NLP side of things and the dialogue side of things. It's you know, you're shipping a complicated application, right? And it might have machine learning in it, but that doesn't mean that it's not software, and that doesn't mean that you should just click it together in a little editor in 5 minutes, right? That's not how any products get built. So
Yeah, and also I wanted to ask you, given that you have this technical vision, like technological vision on the whole space,
mm,
and recently we've been talking a lot. I'm changing topics now. It's just we've been seeing a lot of hype around GPT-3 and how
yeah.
is that affecting some sort of conversational ideas, at least on the web. And I got access to it. I played with it. It's very fun, but
Mm.
I'm curious to know, like, what do you think about that and how you're seeing it, given that I think also you're sharing some investors, I think, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. So Greg Brockman, who's one of the founders of OpenAI, is also an investor in Rasa. But yeah, I mean, on the topic of GPT-3, so in June, not even last month, because it's August now. So in June, we had this online event called L3AI, and I gave a talk there, and I talked about kind of an update of this maturity model that we introduced for conversational AI. So we talk about 5 different levels, right? And it's really an analogy with the self-driving car folks, right? You have 5 levels of autonomous driving. And what I loved about that model is that it's so user-centric and it's so easy to remember. And it actually doesn't talk about technology at all, right? I always can remember that level 5 autonomous driving means I can take a nap in the car and I
Right.
will arrive safely where I want to go, right? And that's it.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if you're using LiDAR or if using it. It doesn't matter how you get there. That's it, right? And that's a vision you can get behind. And so we tried to do something similar with the 5 levels, which I'm more than happy to talk about in detail. But the connection to GPT-3 is when I gave that talk and I talked about, well, how are we going to get to level 5 conversational AI? I said, well, the first thing I'll tell you is how we're not going to get there. And we're not going to get there by just one big language model coming down from the sky, one more big model, one more big chatbot, Mina or Blender or any of these things. They're all important things and they're all valuable, but that's not how this space is going to get solved. And then, funnily enough, a week or 2 later, the hype for GPT-3 really started to pick up because the API opened up the playground and people could start building with it. And it wasn't just a very, very long paper. And so I think it's an important piece. I've been playing with it myself. Actually, after our quick chat last week, I built a demo on Friday. I couldn't resist integrating GPT-3 into one of our products just for fun.
Nice.
Which I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, I think it's a meaningful, impactful development, but it doesn't solve the topic, right? It's just another interesting data point for us to learn from. So I'm happy to talk about why, or like what the problems with it are, but or talk about some of the demos we've looked at.
So I think the first interesting thing is just for our audience and also for me, like I tried to read the paper and I think I understood it, but I probably didn't. And then you guys put out a great content about like, let's read the paper together. And that was very useful for me to get a better understanding. But basically in my mind, what GPT-3 is a huge model of everything that was ever said in the internet. And then it's predicting what happens next. So you give it a little bit of text and then it will try to mimic what it knows and the text previously and just keep talking, basically. Am I wrong when I'm thinking about it that way?
I mean, that's the explanation I would have given too. So
Awesome.
that's spot on. Yeah, and there are obviously lots of like technical innovations, that make that up. But conceptually, exactly what it is, right? And there's this idea that everybody talks about in machine learning, like, oh, more data, bigger model, more GPUs, and it gets better, right? And I think a lot of people who are in the NLP space say, yes, we know that that's not interesting. I disagree. I think it is interesting. I think it's an interesting empirical question to say, okay, well, when does that stop giving returns? Can you just keep pushing, right? And I think going and just pushing those limits even further and noticing that more interesting things come out is actually a really interesting piece of science. And so that's my take, but not everyone agrees with that. But yeah, that's essentially what GPT-3 does. But the really remarkable thing that comes out of this model that I haven't seen anywhere else is this idea that you can show it a task and it will just complete it, right? So typically, if you have one of these large language models, GPT-2 or BERT or any of these you've heard of, it plays this game exactly as you say of just predicting the next word, right?
Right.
But if you prompt a GPT-3 with like a pattern, it will pick up on the pattern and just complete things following that pattern. And that's not something I've seen before. Like it really knows what you're doing, or knows what you're doing. It is able to infer, okay, there's a pattern here and I'm going to complete it, right? In kind of meaningful ways and kind of remarkable ways. And we're just scratching the surface of what all is in there. So it's a remarkable thing for all sorts of reasons. Right. If you give it a haiku, if you show it 2 haikus and then ask it to autocomplete, it will probably just come up with a 3rd haiku. I haven't tried it, but that's the kind of thing, right? It picks up on the structure of what you're putting in and will roll with it. And that's why you see all these cool demos where people give a short description and then it generates like a landing page, or it generates a Figma file, or a, a React app, all sorts of crazy things. So it's really quite remarkable. And then the question is, to what extent is this useful for conversational AI, right? Because on the one hand, you could say, well, I could just have GPT-3 answer my customers' questions since it seems to know everything, right? And so one of the experiments that I did was I was just playing with it and I gave it some rows of information, some structured information. So, I mean, the classic case that everybody talks about is always restaurant search. So I did restaurant search just for the fun of it, right? Okay. And so I did kind of comma separated values, name of the restaurant, whether it has Wi-Fi, price range, and I don't know, a few other things, right? And it did that for 4 restaurants, and then gave a sentence, give it a question like, oh, which of those have Wi-Fi, and then giving an answer that says, oh, this one does, those 2 don't, or this one, this one's good, but those 2 are closer by or have a better price, right? Kind of compare and contrast these things in this list,
right?
And so, remarkably enough, right, you give it 2 of these and then ask it to autocomplete, and it totally understands. Read this table and then come up with a nicely formulated sentence which compares and contrasts the values. But then it also just starts inventing facts. It started saying, oh, this one has great reviews on Yelp, and this one, like, somebody's steak was burnt, or like whatever thing, right? And there's no way to control this model or prevent it from doing that. We can't constrain it and say, only generate language. It will generate some very convincing language, and it will be conditioned on that, but you can't tell it, don't say anything that I haven't explicitly told you, right? Because it's just kind of sampling words and it doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't have a concept of what it's doing. And so it's not something where you can just say, oh, well, I can just like give this to users and just trust that it's gonna, I mean, there are all sorts of, I mean, that's just on the practical side, of course. People have looked into all sorts of ethical considerations as well. And there tons of horrendous things in that model. If you ask it to autocomplete things with even the slightest hint of, giving me a racist or biased opinion, it will happily do so. So all sorts of nasty things can come out, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's very interesting. It's a piece of research that is extremely remarkable. I think you can use it only if you don't allow the user to prompt it. So like if you control what is being feed into it, and it's not the user who decides that, then maybe you can use it, but which means it's not a conversational AI application right now. It's something different. That's the way I'm looking at it.
So a couple of things that I've tried with it with some success is one, when you have this bootstrapping problem, right? So let's say you're in Botsociety and you say, okay, I have to create an order pizza intent.
Right.
and I come up with one example. If you give it this pattern of, oh, give me paraphrases or give me other examples of this, GPT-3 will happily do so, right? And you probably want a human in the loop to say, okay, this one is actually valid and this one
Yeah.
looks like nonsense.
Don't don't give away our future features that I shared with you in the previous call, though. Stop there. But yeah, for that, I agree. For that, it works remarkably well.
Yeah, for those kinds of things, I tweeted something last week where I just got, so we have this feature in Rasa X where you can do interactive learning. So you can take the part of the user, and then when the bot makes mistakes, you can correct what the bot should have done instead. And then after our conversation last week, I had the idea of, well, why don't we, rather than me trying to come up with what the user would say, get GPT-3 to come up with what the user would say. And that worked quite well. It was quite fun. Again, with a little bit of prompting, it started to come out with some really disturbing things. So as fun as it was, I wouldn't push it out to users, at least not right now. So lots of open questions, but really quite cool.
Yeah, I tried to build an AI teacher, which is just taking Wikipedia page and then trying to come up with questions and then telling you which is the right question, which works great like 90% of the times. But sometimes the questions that it asks are hilarious. Like I prompted it with a very famous Italian politician in the Wikipedia page, and it went back and it said, oh, which one of this was a famous Italian politician? The first option was like Attila di Hon, and the second one was the right question, the right answer. So
Excellent.
It's hilarious sometimes, but yeah, it's very powerful. And okay, so switching gears, like apart from this kind of like research, more research, without taking away actually the research side, what do you think is next for conversational AI? Given that, you know, it's, I think we kind of, we're sure it's not GPT-3 right now, by the way. So.
yeah. I mean, it's a useful piece of the puzzle. It's a useful tool,
Right.
but it doesn't solve or conclude anything, right? And the other piece, of course, which I will want to mention, because Rasa has such a global community, right? All of this is pretty much English only right now, and I think there may be some other languages in that model just from noise, right? But that's not the primary, and it certainly won't have on par performance with all these other languages, right? And we have a huge community in Brazil, in China, in India, in all over the place. And so we're very aware that English is not the world's only language, and that people want to build assistants and all sorts of things, right?
Absolutely.
So the other thing is what's next that isn't necessarily research driven. I think one of the shifts that I've noticed and have also been advocating for is being more user driven in the way that we build these things. I think that historically the way people have built software is to gather some requirements and then go and design a way to meet those and match those requirements and implement something and then ship it. And of course, the best teams don't do things that way, right? They bring the discovery process into the agile sort of loop. And so this shift from like waterfall to agile, I think has an analogy in the space of conversational AI, right? And it's adopting something that we call conversation-driven development. And the idea being that you bring users into the loop as early as possible, right? Because it's absolutely impossible to anticipate all the things that users will say to your assistant, right? You cannot just imagine them, right? Even with GPT-3 helping you out, you cannot possibly anticipate what people are going to say. And so you want to bring them into that feedback loop as early as possible. And you want to use that really to drive the conversation. And you want to spend a lot of time looking at the conversations that people have with your assistant, right? Because, metrics and all of that are great, but ultimately, you as a human can interpret what this person wants, right? And so I think it's a really key piece. So if we want to think about how do we make conversational AI better, actually listening to what people are saying to the bot or assistant or voice assistant or whatever we have, what people are saying now actually contains the information we need to make it better, right? And that's very different from any other kind of software. And that's a unique challenge, but also a unique opportunity, right? And so the idea of embracing conversation-driven development is really, okay, conversations are the sort of primary element, right? And we're going to build things around that. And apart from that, we're going to bring all our good habits from how we build other kinds of software to this process, right?
Mm.
So, and this embraces a whole bunch of different shifts. One is that if you look a few years ago, conversational AI was kind of a innovation project in companies. You know, they'd say, okay, get some developers who know some NLP to go and build something. Now, I think the thinking is much more sophisticated, right? I mean, you've talked a lot about the idea that conversational designer is now a real job. It is, and it should be, right? And these people are involved, and they're building product teams around it, right? And so the product teams who have shipped things before and are on their second or third iteration, they know all of this. They know that you can't go off into the mountains for 3 months and then build something and then give it to users and expect it to work, right? Like it won't work. There's no excuses, no workarounds, no exceptions, right? It's not going to work the first time. So better to just embrace that and make it part of the process. And so what I think all of us who've been in this space, I think all of us who have been in the space for a while owe it to everyone who's coming in now to kind of give them shortcuts so they don't have to learn that the hard way, right? So that we can say, look, here are some things that we've learned. Share with users often, look through real conversations, and then bring all your good engineering practices in, right? You know, write tests, do CI/CD, do review, and like all these kinds of things, like uptime monitoring and all of that stuff. Just because we're using machine learning doesn't mean that we're off the hook for being professionals. Like, if we're shipping software, we should do it like professionals.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think that's true also for the design process. So, like, if you're designing a conversation, like you will go through a lot of the best practices that you're used to in like validating a mobile app, for example. Like, it's the same kind of like mental model on a lot of things. In the same way that you mentioned continuous integration, which means like every time you push code, there's a system that checks if all the tests run smoothly, right? You have similar things in design where like you're sharing a lot of those best practices in conversation design. It doesn't mean that since you're designing for AI, it doesn't mean that you're kind of throwing away a lot of the best practices in the past. But I agree with you that the level of information that users give you is substantially better than any
Right.
other type of interface. It's crazy. And so if you embrace it,
They're literally telling you what they want in their own language, right? So, I mean, that potentially is the designer's dream, because you're just doing development and user research and feedback all in one. But like Botsociety and Rasa and all these other tools have to somehow make that doable, right? Have to make that accessible and have to sort of unlock what's happening in there, which is a key piece. And what I really like, and I think so there's this sort of tooling layer on the very mechanical side of, okay, how do we look at these things and, you know, where does the data go? But there's also a conceptual piece of the puzzle, which I know you talk about, which is how do we even get a common vocabulary to talk about the things that we're seeing, right? Like, can we come up with, you know, the different types of failure modes that we see, right? And can we agree on what are the, you know, common failure modes and how do we talk about them and how do we resolve them and which ones are priority and which ones are not? And what are these, I think you call them conversational patterns, right? That we see coming up and which ones are going well, which ones aren't. I think that'll also be a key piece, as much as the tooling, right, is just the technology of having nomenclature that people share.
Yeah, especially between cross-functional teams, because otherwise, like, we get siloed into, okay, there's, you know, sometimes it happens to us that like we're talking to the business owner and the marketing folks and the designers, and they have different set of definitions. And so then it's difficult to get on the same page. And I'm really curious to know, like, what you're thinking about this type of nomenclature and how that ties into CDD. So like conversation-driven development.
So I think the side that is reasonably well fleshed out for now, you know, status quo currently, is what does it look like primarily from a developer's perspective to practice CDD, right? And I think part of also my interest in coming on the podcast was, well, let's hear what the designers have to say about this,
right?
And the experts who think about this all the time, right? What is that extra layer and how do they fit in and how does that fit into this process of of conversation driven development. I think it's I think it's key. And I think, we have a primarily developer audience. And so the way we name things and the way we talk about things can often be very, very technical, right? So if you have the idea of like disambiguation, right? A user says something, the model isn't very confident, but it's not confident enough to just outright reject it, but it's like stuck between two options, right? Kind of giving the user those options and letting them choose one of them. What would you call that? What name would you give to that process?
That's a very good question. I would probably call it a disambiguation path. How would you call it?
Path? Yeah. So in Rasa, it's called a two-stage fallback policy, which is probably a little too technical for having a cross-functional team talk about it, right? And so that's something I'm interested in repairing, as it were, or kind of adding some glue to make that easier to talk about these things. Because, again, there are enough common patterns between different applications that it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, if you take a look at more advanced assistants, they have all of this stuff. Like, they have disambiguation experiences. They have worked a lot on what people say and reacted to that and updated their agents because of that. So it's kind of like already happening on a lot of fronts. And we're just we're just looking at this and saying, okay, how do we kind of like bring this forward to the broader community, since there's already a lot of this going on some pockets here and there, which are very successful.
I would add one more thing, which is there's a kind of galaxy brain take on the disambiguation topic, which is that actually even that is the wrong name for it. And so when we talk about like 5 levels of conversational AI, the difference between level 3 and level 4 is, and I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but one of the key differences is the kind of situation where a user comes in and says, I think the example I give in the blog post is, my kids have gone to college and I want to downsize, right? And if you're, building a bank assistant or something like that, all sorts of things that could lead to, right? Maybe they want to quote for a mortgage, maybe they want to quote for new home insurance policy, or maybe they want to take out a second mortgage and go on a cruise, who knows, right? Could be anything. And so from a developer's perspective, you say, well, this is ambiguous input and I should disambiguate what the user wants. But I think that's the wrong way to think about it, because the user's being perfectly clear. They've said something which is completely unambiguous. They've told you some information, right? It's only ambiguous to you because you don't know how to help it. And so I think a big part of making progress is saying, well, this is what the user wants, and it's our job to figure out how to help them. And they shouldn't have to do that effort of translating their situation into one of our services that we provide. And so I think that's a key thing to kind of embrace as well.
That's very interesting. So because you're basically saying, okay, the real next level for this type of agents is, okay, instead of asking the user to kind of categorize himself, his own will into something that we already built, we should start to think about conversational AI as in, like, we need to interpret the will of the user, and we do
it's a kind of a joint discovery process, right? The user doesn't have to know exactly what the end state will be in order to get that, in order to satisfactorily get an answer.
Right. Yeah. And I think another thing that I found really interesting about this topic is that the context also changes based on what you may not predict on the conversation. As in, like, the first time that you're showing your bot to a user, the context of, like, okay, why is this bot useful? Why should I talk to it? It's really a little bit unpredictable as well. So when you're talking about CDD and like how we can make this more agile, I think it does not only impact like how people say the same intent again, but it's also bigger, like how people interpret the personality that you started to design, willingly or unwillingly, and how people interpret the context. So and in getting to this fourth level, it's crucial to switch to this more agile approach. Otherwise, you'll never. I don't feel like you'll iterate fast enough to get there.
You don't iterate fast enough, and also you're not making use of all the data that you're collecting, right? People are telling you these things. They're telling you what you want, what they want, and you can use that to learn, right? And that's kind of the key piece, right? If we're embracing machine learning and we're building all this technology that can learn from data, well, why don't we?
Right. Yeah,
Let's actually
absolutely.
do that.
And one question that I would have from a designer point of view would be like, okay, so then what is the MVP? Because like, for example, if I'm designing a mobile app, I read the Google Sprint process, I've seen the videos of those guys, and I know that like, okay, I can come up with a prototype of like 5 screens. I can even sketch it on paper and then show my users and see how they react. And then in like 5 days or 4 days or whatever, I have some feedback on my idea and I can move on. And I feel like one of the difficult things about conversational AI is that it's so open-ended that it's still not clear to the community, like what's the MVP that I should start validating on. And so not having that clarity, it's kind of like making it more difficult to take an agile approach, because when does it stop? Like, do I have to start from scratch or... So I was curious. I know this is a hard question, but I was curious what's...
Well, I mean, no. So my take on CDD is that you should share as early as possible. So as soon as you have the most basic thing, right? Even if you can only answer 2-3 questions, and maybe complete one little form or something like that, right? At that point, go and share. And it doesn't have to be with end users right away, but go and share with someone who doesn't sit near you or is on your team, right? And you go out there and give it to people, because you can't anticipate what they'll say. They will always surprise you, right? And that will help you, because as you say quite rightly, the context of like, where does this sit, right, is a huge thing. So if you're quite often people want to integrate a chatbot on a website, right? And then if it's not on the real website, but it's just a chat widget on a blank HTML page, that's a very different context, and people have different expectations and all sorts of things, right? So it will help you think of, okay, how do I prime the user, and how do I prime their expectations, and what's the name that I give to this bot? And because that will also give expectations of what it can do, right? What do I put in that welcome message if I have a welcome message, that kind of thing. So I think all of those, like none of that hypothetical stuff will survive contact with reality. So you're better off just pushing it out and getting people to try it out, and then having a process of refining that. And then I think it's up to us as folks who make tools to lower the barrier as much as possible to enabling that process, right? Like, how easy can we make it to test your ideas out, without then constraining things so much that you can't progress once you want to go beyond the basics, right? Which is, I think, an issue with a number of tools out there.
Yeah, because like you start out simple, but you will get to a point where you need more powerful stuff kind of quickly, actually, especially if you take, it's kind of counterintuitive, but if you take this agile approach, you actually want more powerful stuff sooner because you realize sooner what you need.
Well, how difficult it's really going to be. Yeah, otherwise you live in your fantasy land where everybody says the things that you hope they're going to say, and then you don't have to worry about it so much. Yeah.
That's great. So switching gears, like I want to ask you, what's next for Rasa? So we've been talking a lot about your vision in general, but I'm curious about like where you're bringing Rasa, or where you're seeing Rasa going in the, I would say, near future.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are working on right now is 2.0 release of Rasa open source, which should be out in the next couple of months. And I mean, there are 2 key themes, I think, of what we're trying to do with it. One is dramatically reducing the complexity, especially for new users, right? We just kind of looked at our tutorials and we said, there are way too many concepts in here. There's way too much to learn and internalize. Learning curve is way too steep. And so we said, okay, how do we radically simplify the process of, becoming a competent browser user? And again, without ever sandboxing people or saying that, always giving you the option to peel back the layers of the onion and discover more and do more and customize more things. And then that's one axis, which is just lowering the barrier to building your first assistant. And then the other piece is kind of foundationally increasing what assistants can do and kind of breaking through some of the limitations. And so something that we realized a while ago and have been quite vocal about is the idea that intents have got to go. This concept is well past you, this idea of intents, right? And I'll explain why. So intents are very useful at the beginning of a project, right? Because users could say anything. I mean, this has been the theme of this conversation, right? Users can say absolutely anything. And so it's very, very effective to compress all of that complexity down and say like, well, users can say one of these 10 things, and these are my 10 intents, right? And these are my buckets. But then as your project progresses and as you sort of get these real messages from users, you realize that, there's a large chunk of messages which don't neatly fit into your buckets. And so you scratch your head and you go, okay, well, maybe I need to introduce a new one. And then where else might people say that? And where else am I going to introduce that and all the rest of it? And so you get to a situation where something that helped you in the beginning is now limiting you, right? And so something that Rasa 2.0 lets you do is you can have messages in your conversations, in your training data that don't have an intent assigned, right? And that can be really useful, right? So the example that I always quote, and that's in the blog post about we have to get rid of intent, is I asked the user, or my bot asked the user, are you traveling in economy class? And the user responded, unfortunately. Now, of course, in this case, that means yes, but obviously I'm not comfortable putting the word unfortunately as a training example for the intent, yes, or affirm, or whatever you want to call it, right? It's completely contextual that this means yes, right? And so rather than trying to invent some contextual version of this intent, which is only valid in this case, which is not a scalable way of doing it, I just say, well, this message doesn't have an intent, and then my dialogue model can interpret what it means. And so, I mean, there's lots of questions to be answered around, the tooling and how that's all going to work and the annotation and all the rest of it. But at least algorithmically, conceptually, it's there as of 2.0 that you don't have to have intents for every message. And in fact, if you just have a corpus of conversations with no annotations at all, you can already throw that at Rasa, right? Depending on the corpus, you may get good results, you may not, but it's at least there sort of conceptually that we can do end-to-end learning.
That's amazing. And so what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is like the idea of having to have one intent for every step of the conversation, every step of the way, especially if it's an atomic intent, which is kind of unrelated from the previous part of the conversation, is really not natural. And we should start thinking about, okay, how can we make this so that it's only based on the conversation itself, the back and forth up until that point, instead of the atomic intent, oh, I'm analyzing this message specifically, and that's the intent that I'm extracting. So
yeah. If you completely separate out NLU and dialogue management, then you are imposing on the world a model where you say that users can say one of 20 things or 25 things, or that might be a growing list, but that is what you're imposing on the world, right? And that is useful in the beginning. It's very helpful, but then it becomes very limiting, right? And so the question is, can we break free from that assumption that we have to exactly do, as you say, a one-for-one categorization of every possible thing a user can say into one of these predefined buckets, and then a rule for how to handle them, right?
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And you think we're gonna ever like get rid completely of intents, or it's always gonna be a hybrid system where sometimes you go with the fuel of intents and sometimes you go electric without?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of research in the academic community around purely end-to-end learning, right? And so you can go and collect a corpus of 2,000 dialogues or more, and then train on that, and then you have a kind of working system. But of course, I take a much more practical view, which is no one's ever going to build something like that. No one's going to build their MVP by going on Mechanical Turk and collecting 2,000 dialogues, right? So I don't think that's the approach. The approach is, okay, this is a very useful abstraction for the start of a project, and let's start that way, and then let's give you a path to upgrade and break free from that limitation as you kind of progress from there, right? Because you also have to think about the developer journey and how the project develops over time.
Interesting. And you think, like, from a designer point of view, do we need to like start thinking about the conversation in a different way? Because already right now, I feel like the design community is trying not to think about the conversation in terms of intents on a lot of levels, because it's kind of not the right way from a design point of view, because I want to have like an holistic, complete view of the user experience, and intents are kind of too atomic for that. Um,
Mm.
so do you think there's
I think that's a very valuable and useful perspective to bring to the table, right? And um, yeah, I mean, that pleases me a lot to hear that designers are on board with not thinking of everything as intent.
you really cannot design starting from the intent idea. So I'm not
Mm.
sure if it, but it's also out of necessity. It's like it's the best way to design is not to think about intents. At
Mm.
least that's first step.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Well, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else. I would, talk to you for another 4 hours, like asking you to detail all the 5 different levels of autonomy for conversational AI, and talking more about the future. But unfortunately, our time is running up. I don't know if you wanted to add other things. Before we
I would
close,
maybe add a plug for our YouTube channel, just
please.
because we have a bunch of great content on there, and also because one of the designers on our team recently said that our NLP for Developers series on YouTube is actually also quite interesting for designers. So, if anyone's interested in that, I mean, there's lots of short videos about kind of the main concepts in NLP that you'll hear about. What do they mean? When are they useful? When are they not? And it's Rachel Tapman creates that series. And I mean, there's lots of other content if you want to dive deeper into any of it. But yeah, go check it out. And obviously on the blog and all the rest of it. And if you have thoughts on any of the things that I said, and especially if you disagree with me, just shoot me an email. It's just alan@rasa.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Sounds great. All right. Alan, thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. Looking forward to see what you come up with, Rasa. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me on the show, Vittorio. And yeah, let's chat again soon.
Bye.